former career counselor, really, I agree with your slide about career opportunities for Native American students. I think education is really important, so I really like your quote again. So good job and good work. And the next presenter will be presenting David Delgado Shorter. He's the editor-in-chief of the American Indian Culture and Research Journal. His current research queries settler science and decolonizing English grammar. He's also the director of the Wiki for Indigenous Languages. Thank you, David.
Thank you. I'll repeat what was said before. Thank you for coming to, I think, the very last couple talks of today. I consider myself really honored to be in this group. People have known me since I was very young. Good friends. I was from ASU, so I got a good beginning training. And I'm very interested in traditional ecological knowledge. And in some ways, my talk is about a whole different aspect of this larger world, which is the actual publishing aspect of this work, which is, as many people know, where the road hits the tire, or the tire hits the road for many of us to even get more Native scholars into the academy. I'll start by first acknowledging the sovereignty of all Native peoples who call this land home. I want to thank the other presenters for sharing the stage with me today. My intent today was to let scholars and community members see behind the curtain of what's going on at our journal, because I think that some of the recent changes, particularly in the very hard landscape we've been in the last couple of years, and probably going to get harder for the next couple of years at least, I think if we were to look behind that curtain, we would see something very useful for all of our work and perhaps the future of Native studies. If we were to think of Native studies as a place that should actually make a change to the larger academic world, rather than just trying to find some peripheral space in it. And that's really what I think my goal has been as the editor-in-chief. So for those of you who don't know, I should start out by saying that the American Indian Culture and Research Journal started as a publication at the University of California in 1974. It was a product of the American Indian Cultural Program at UCLA. And the journal's name with that word culture in it was actually very important at the time, because the people who made it come into formation were Dennis Banks and John Trudell and Russell Means, Clyde and Vernon Bellecourt. They approached the assistant director of American Indian Studies at the time, Kogi Thomas, and they said that we want a professional space, which is how we got the center, which still is to this day, there inside Campbell Hall. And we also want a newsletter or some form of distribution to talk about Indigenous peoples and their cultures in a way that helps living Native communities. That's why we've kept that word culture in there, and we've debated whether to change the name of it more recently into something more global, but we are going to keep it for what it is for now. Our concern has been and remains about sustenance, cultural vitality. We try to think of these things as broadly as possible. It started as a newsletter, and so it's kind of interesting to us that this newsletter that started out being about the lives and projects of mostly UCLA American Indian students and their allies is still something we're focusing on, because culture remains a really original intent and a reminder for our responsibility to not just distribute research about other people, but research that speaks from Native communities and to Native communities. And I say this very well aware of the fact that I'm a settler. I'll again talk about that in a little bit, about what it means to be an editor-in-chief who's not Native. It's the impact of many Native students, faculty, and staff and their allies that we have to take into account for the journal's trajectory. We were the first academic peer-reviewed journal that published essays about North American Indigenous scholarship and their cultural issues that generally at the time did not rise to scholarly attention, which means that we were the first academic journal to include environmental degradation, health concerns, poverty levels across Indian country. I'm not saying that other scholarly journals were not publishing research, but because we have a category that exists today called commentary that is still peer-reviewed, we accept reports from the field or statements from tribal communities who want to share about something, and we did this a lot. Pretty much within 3 months after COVID started, we were sharing commentaries from Native country about what they were doing and what they were taking care of when it came to their wellness, broadly conceived again. We've been mostly Indigenous-led. from our publications committee to our editorial boards to our editors-in-chief for almost 5 decades. I am a settler, I've said that before, and I'm one of handful who have helped along the way. I think these decisions need to be very context-specific. If I do this now, I can help some of my native scholars focus on their merit and promotion for a few years and then hand that reign back over to them. I think it makes sense at times to see yourself as a person who carries water, whether you make the water or have anything to do with the distribution of the water. We see in our journal that we are members of a larger community. I used to be an editor many years ago for Red Ink. I have so much respect for Kazo Shah Review, NICE, SAIL. We read these journals. I make sure that my editorial team reads these journals. I am regularly telling people who submit to our journal, you should consider these other journals. They are also incredible, fantastic. If you haven't read the way that NICE has done this most recent issue on Palestine, it's one of the more, I think, fantastic special issues that have come out in a couple of years in our field. And as many of us know in this room, we've been open access for 2 years. And that's huge. We gave up subscriptions as income. And I'm going to come back to that in this particular presidential landscape. I was brought on the month before we went open. It was a tribute to Hoanani K. Trask. It was a fantastic issue. And we'd always wanted to go online, open access, because many of our authors were writing from Native communities. That means they were often writing about communities who were blocked because of paywalls from seeing the material that was written about their communities. So we really wanted to go open access, and the impact is really incredible. And I want to share a little bit of what makes that so incredible right now. Because when you're open access, you can actually see real-time analytics, which is so much different than a hard copy journal where you're not quite sure from your distribution who read it, who actually got it from the library. So last year, in June, we had 13,000 viewers a month. This year, in the last 3 months, we've averaged 30,000 viewers a month. Our December issue, called Still Bad Indians, a reappreciation of Deborah Miranda's classic book at this point, had 3,500 viewers, which is more than most top-selling books in academic presses. We've been perhaps 2 months out from the last issue, which is Language Lives in Unexpected Places, which is about language vitalization technologies. It has accumulated more views in a single month than any other published in the history of the journal. I'd like you to consider this really amazing thing. In 2024 alone, our journal has been accessed 375,000 times, and it has a 36% download rate, which means of the visitors, almost 40% download some aspect of it. These numbers are impressive by any measure, and the statistics evidence not only the quality of the research, as I'd like to believe, but I also want to credit the authors who make it possible. But I also think it's saying something about how AIS research is reaching people outside of the academy, including possibly policymakers, senators, representatives. I think a really great old friend of mine, Eric Deshaies, just wrote me a couple weeks ago saying, I saw this article that I don't even normally read your journal. Our move to open access has facilitated widespread dissemination of, as you might want to think about it, indigenous methodologies, indigenous data collection. What does it mean to do indigenous data interpretation? And of course, indigenous theories. Usually about a month after an issue is released, we get about 22,000 viewers. In March, we had 30,000, and in April, we had 38,000. That's unbelievable when you think about what the field was when I started, and well, that's too long ago. When dinosaurs roamed the earth, we did not have that sort of viewership that we knew of, at least, in such journals, because we only had the hard copies, so we didn't really know what was being read when you sent them out. Going open access entails another change that we feel furthers a form of publication that is really important for our field and all its subfields. Gone are the concerns for images or figures, because we don't have to worry about the cost of printing or ink. So that's an invitation for all of you to consider whether you want to send work in, because now that we're in the digital form, we don't even have to have those conversations about how many images you get. For those of us in the room, I might remember how painful those were with our publishers to get 6 images and they had to be black and white or something. In the last year, we've updated our bylaws to reflect our desire to indigenize the editorial board and process. And I want to talk a minute about what that might mean, because I think a lot of people use the word decolonize way too much. So we didn't want to use that word, but what would it might mean to indigenize some aspect of academic publishing? Well, since we're on Tongva land, and of course in a region that's pretty horrible in terms of erasure, we wanted to bring more focus to the indigenous communities and scholars from the land on which we're sitting. So we expanded the editorial board by 3 positions, and now 1 board position is reserved. 2 board positions are reserved for indigenous scholars from the state of California, and 1 is reserved for indigenous community members from Los Angeles' ancestral communities. Second, we expanded our working definition of scholar. So now we include wisdom keepers, elders, and knowledge bearers from Native communities, rather than whether you have a terminal degree. In practice, how that might look is that when we're seeking an editorial board member or a reviewer for an essay, we will actually reach out to communities who actually might know someone who is knowledgeable on a particular topic, regardless of their educational degree. The third change was less of a policy change and more of an editorial change. I asked our editorial team to read peer review evaluations, the ones that we get from people who do the peer review, as a means to find the supportive and suggestive path forward in order to allow a summary judgment that's not just a binary, like reject or accept. So that means, well, I should say something really interesting. When I first got the job as editor-in-chief, you read the very first thing that comes in and you read the editorial, the peer reviews. I was shocked at how rude reviewers could be. I didn't know that that was the world that we were in, I guess. I was very lucky, or I haven't published it, but anyway, I was seeing some pretty harsh criticisms to junior scholars, including women of color or indigenous women, and they were mostly from anthropologists or historians, just saying it as it is. And I think there was something about it being faceless and they're being protected, like they're nameless, that they would bring out these things like, this author sounds too angry, reject. As if anger isn't a fantastic way to express what we should be doing in Native studies. Or this person didn't have enough scholarly sources published from, and then they would list clearly the people who are in their social network. So I felt that should be a change. Now what that actually looks like in practice is that what we communicate to the authors now is a little bit different than what a lot of journals do. It takes a little extra work and time, but we now take the peer reviews as we receive them and we tell them that those are available to them on the platform if they want to click on the link and go there. However, here is our understanding of those, and then we paraphrase and we take out and just simply don't say that seems really overly negative, because what we want to accentuate when possible is what is the path forward, if not with us, then with another journal. And we invite them to consider the whole secondary category we have, which is commentaries. My goal here is to imagine a peer review process that is not punitive and might shut someone down at the most important part of their academic career. A fourth change that we've considered entails our line editing process. So, of course, we use Chicago Manual style because we're not heathens. But we also reference the book Elements of Indigenous Style. And I've actually asked all the editorial team to review what it means to use citational practices that respect collective authorship as well as community knowledge-making practices. We still require scholarly essays engage recent publications in the field, but now we consider that there could be a level of community-based experience, and that would be more important than whether you cited the top book that was published in the last 10 years, particularly if you're creating new theory that's based in your particular community. Also, to move away from the unavoidable individualism inherent in scholarly profession, we worked with our online publisher to reformat the submission forms and the final published display, which now allows for collaborative authorship and collectives. So when we first moved to open access, the web-based platform only allowed you to have one author, and then you could have collaborators. Well, one person still has to be the primary contact because we need an email address. It's like signing on to any sort of website. However, we now allow for unlimited authors to be listed or for the creation of a single collective. And we've already 3 times published like an early childhood education collective, a health collective from Hawaii, like ways that people want to use a unified or collective voice. And in keeping with the ways that I've found personal introductions, as a person who spent a lot of my adolescent years on the Navajo reservation, I gave more attention to how people want to introduce themselves. I found it really odd that we only allowed 3 lines for an author bio. It seemed to me that in Native communities that I've been in, your introduction is how you introduce your relationality. And that doesn't come easy when you have multiple tribes. It doesn't come easy when you're using native languages. And so now we've moved to a bio section that is upwards of 80 words, and we're going to just put them all together. Thank you. Now, I believe these changes and others will have helped us achieve some major milestones. We have raised our H index factor from good to excellent among scholarly journals. Our essays have already received not 1, but 2 national awards. We were just added 2 weeks ago to the Directory of Open Access Journals, which only accepts journals that have ethical publishing practices. And as you saw yesterday in the panel, if you were there, we've approved a new statement of ethics that outlines our position for handling cases of AI as well as fraudulent listing of one's identity. And I'd like to conclude by giving some insights to those of you who might be thinking about publishing with us. We do publish minimum 8,000 word essays, so when you submit something to us, it should be between 8,000 and 11,000 words. And if you decide to publish a commentary, those are between 5,000 and 9,000 words, and those are still peer reviewed. So they can go in your peer review section on your CV. I'm gonna just skip to the ending here because I actually decided that this is more important to say. Do I? Oh, I'm going to read the part I was going to cut. Submissions should analyze and not just cite scholarly works from the last 5 years. That is actually something we care about. And here's something for those of you who are thinking, well, maybe not this year, but next year. We are still focused primarily on Indigenous North American content, but we are increasing the scope to include Abya Yala. And I don't know if I've even told the board yet that, but I do want to start including as much as possible the Americas globally conceived. And if our American Indian Studies Department at UCLA changes its name, it's hard to imagine us doing anything in this moment because everything just gets a no right now from all our deans. But I would imagine the title of the journal would actually change to be more global, which I think would be really nice. But there are some fantastic global Indigenous Studies journals right now, so I also would think we'd have to look at it then. So we only send out those reviews for review, those essays that are structurally sound, grammatically polished, all that stuff. But this is a really important thing for people. Depending on how quickly we can find reviewers, we are still publishing an article within 18 months of submission, and that's pretty good for most anything that, I mean, in social sciences, that's not really normal. So we're on top of that, I think, right now. I can elaborate on any of this if anyone wants to after the talk. And I've put, if you don't want to talk to me for whatever reason, here's a bunch of cards. You can just grab one and use the QR code and go to our site and then email me later. I'm working this summer like an idiot. I do have 2 asks, which is really weird in a professional talk. The future of our funding is really not sure now, because when we went to open access, we went to a model that is managed by a company called Lyricist, which is part of the California Digital Library. And it made our existence possible due to 3 to 5 year commitments from other institutions who have all seen major cuts in the last 3 months and have scaled back their commitments. And it's going to be a really hard road forward to continue being who we are in the way that we are. If you have any relationships with your institutions or tribal governments, particularly developmental offices, and you can imagine of anyone being interested in supporting us, could you please reach out to me personally? I asked our director, Shannon Speed, if I could make such a weird plea, and she said, sure. That seems like something that's pretty dire right now. Now, secondly, I want to ask something on behalf of all editors and publishers everywhere, no matter what your professional stage is. If you're asked by a journal to review an essay, could you please say yes? The number one thing that holds up someone's article from being published, and therefore them not getting to their merit and promotion in time with a published piece, is that it's taking us 2 to 3 months to get someone to say yes to review an article, because we have to keep going down to someone else. If you simply can't, I get it. It is actually really hugely great when you can suggest someone or a couple other people who might take it on. It literally enables us to get that request out 3 minutes later. So, in that mode of ending with an ask, I should actually add a final mode, which is the thank you. Thank you to the readers, to any of you who've actually read something for us before, for those of you who've served on our editorial board who might be in the room, which I know you're here. Thank you if you're from one of the libraries who've actually supported us, who are listed on our homepage before. As we approach this 50th year, we're in our 50th year of official existence as an academic journal. We're very proud of our continuous commitment to publishing peer-reviewed scholarship about, with, and most importantly, by Indigenous people. Thank you.